Rules, secrets, truth, and women. Today, let's break down some myths and stories that we've told ourselves for far too long and talk about starting a transformation movement for ourselves and the world. Hey, I'm Jackie Ulmer, and welcome to Transformation Decoded. Joining me today are Isabelle Banerjee and Woodward. As I mentioned, today we're going to be doing a two-part series on the myths and stories that we've heard, told ourselves, lived under, and possibly revolted from, or are wished to at least run away from some of these. So we have really, in the world that we're living in today, and especially as women, I think you're going to really be able to relate to this. So I've broken this down basically into four concepts: rules, secrets, truths, and women. So let's start with rules. We're taught at a pretty early age a couple of rules. Be a good girl, be thin and pretty, because those are the goals. Don't talk about the bad stuff. Those are three that many of us can totally relate to being brought up. And conversely, when we think about boys growing up and we think about them on the playground, they tease each other, they call each other names, they get in a tussle, they get in a fight, and then they just move on. They often don't even really carry a grudge. But that's not so much the case with girls, and we're definitely taught to play nice and be good. And above all, keep the peace, be inclusive of everyone. And it's interesting, there were a few years ago, well, a long time ago, actually over 20 years ago, my husband and I were on a houseboat trip with three other couples. We were at Lake Powell, and it was funny. It was the very first night or afternoon on the houseboat, and we were all up top going down the slide into the water. My husband went down the slide first, and he called up to his buddy and said, "Oh my gosh, you fat butt, basically, you're going to drain the lake when you come down the slide and land in the water." And they all just laughed. All the men laughed, thought that was the funniest thing ever. And I looked at my girlfriends and said to them, "Can you imagine if I said that to you? A, would you find it funny? B, would you ever forgive me? And C, would you ever forget about it?" And all of us agreed there's no way that that conversation could ever happen. Right, ladies? Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting how we have those different paradigms. And my husband and I have laughed about that for years. That conversation still comes up because it's so true with who we are. So let's talk about these three things. It's so interesting. We wonder why women today struggle with being good enough. So what does it mean to be a good girl? What does it mean to be a good girl? So Isabel, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about what that is for you.
My name is Isabelle Banerjee, and I'm a very conflicted, bad, good girl. I'm the CEO of the Encore Catalyst, and I really have a very complicated and convoluted history with figuring out good and bad according to other people's standards and according to the responsibilities I had at the time. You know, I grew up on a farm, so I can really relate to what you were talking about, Jackie, about how boys are encouraged to be rough and tumble and aggressive and rude, and they like to make body sounds, and anything to do with their butt is hilarious, right? Where we as girls had to sit, almost with our white gloves and be absolutely perfect and quiet and well-mannered and offer lemonade. And the boys who didn't behave according to those protocols were called sissies and, fluffy and whatever the appropriate, the societal term was at the time. And the girls who were more, deemed masculine in their behaviors, they were frowned upon and sort of looked at suspiciously like, boy, she's going to have a hard time catching a man. Like, really, can't somebody go and do something with her hair and her makeup? And it really was challenging for me because I was the eldest on a farming family. So I had to be the boy on the farm, but for outward appearances, I had to be that perfect little girl in the house and around adults.
And what does perfect mean?
By the definition then, it was don't speak up be quiet, serve others, always try to be put together, get up early quietly and get dressed and make sure that you are very respectful to your elders and basically just be a hollow vessel that other people directed around behaviors.
Very good. And
Yeah.
Lee, I can't wait to hear from you. You actually were part of a big catalyst of this a few episodes back when you mentioned be a good girl, be nice. You actually mentioned that in one of our conversations. And I remember that just kind of triggering me for a sec thinking, wow. So introduce yourself, please, Lee, and share what you think it means to be a good girl or what stories you've been conditioned to believe that is.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Lee Woodward, and I am owner of Woman in Disguise. And, for me, that good girl and Isabel, something you just said kind of really resonated with me. This whole idea of, I think we all have definitions of good girl. Be nice, be kind, be polite. Don't rock the boat. Put other
Yeah.
people before you. So we have this list of things. But Isabel, you said something that just kind of made me go, oh, wow. Really, I think the difference, and Jackie, kind of your story, it seems like for me, it means that I'm supposed to give over my control to other people, and
Yeah.
they get to tell me what it means to be a good girl. And that can mean different things at different times. But so, Isabel, something you said there made me go, gosh, that's the real, to me, call it danger, whatever, of kind of that influences. It's more
Mm.
about the real message is, hey, you're not supposed to be in control. You're supposed to give control over to someone else to tell you how to feel and act. And I
Yeah.
think ultimately that's the message of that I got, is how do you be a good girl? Well, you let someone else tell you that, and then you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, shifting then to rule number 2, and I'm going to stay with you, Lee, because you have such a great story with this, and that is kind of thin and pretty is the ultimate goal. Like that's what we're taught to be as women, not focused necessarily initially on our brains, how smart we are, how capable we are, different things that we can do in that way, but first and foremost, that physical appearance, that ideal. So share some of what that means to you.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's a part of my life that I've spent a lot of time, thinking about. I struggled with eating disorders starting very early in my life. I had the first recognition of, wow, my body's not right. It's too big. And I want to say I was about 7 or 8 years old when I had that first recognition, looking in the mirror. And that just kind of started me on a path of everything from anorexia, bulimia, you kind of obsessing about my weight and what I looked like, what I looked like. And I think it does come back to that control element, is that for me it was a very unhealthy way though, but it was a way to gain control over
Wow.
feelings and emotions. And I think that we're taught in the media mainstream, because definitely that was part of the challenge, looking at the magazines. And I had them, the pictures, remember paper magazines, I would take out the pictures and put them on my wall, and there were these images, and that reinforced I'm supposed to be something else. I'm supposed to be something else.
Mm.
And out of the things that you control, it's harder to control feelings and emotions. Controlling my body ended up to be a way to kind of start to say, okay, I know I'm supposed to be different. This is one way I can do that. So a lot of those control elements mixed in there with my eating disorders as well.
And it's interesting in reflecting back. And by the way, this is not about blaming men or forcing all responsibility on them by any means. Certainly, they've somewhat contributed to it, but we have as well by buying into it for all these years. But isn't it interesting that by far women have eating disorders on a much bigger scale than men do? And that tells you a little bit about those standards that we live under with society, without a doubt.
Yeah, I
Is it?
mean, absolutely. Oh, sorry. I was
No,
going to
no,
say
go ahead.
absolutely. And to your point, It's actually a disturbing trend because more men are, and I should say boys especially now, are exhibiting um, eating disorders, and that's been increasing. So it's a little bit interesting as you think about Instagram and all the social media and the body types, and they tried to put the dad bod in there, but here comes Chris Hemsworth right back into main screen, so dad
Yeah.
bod didn't last long.
You know, it's interesting, and that was going to be my question, of course. What role do you think social media plays in that? But when you do think about that, men didn't grow up by and large. I know there's Men's Health magazine. I'm trying to think of magazines that really focus on men in terms of that body standard, that physique and that physical thing. Whereas women, I mean, we can go down the list from Glamour to Cosmopolitan to Vogue to Marie Claire. I mean, it's limitless. And 17 magazine, for goodness sakes, you know, and Teen magazine and Self and Shape. And I can name a whole plethora of women's magazines way before social media. So that standard was set out for us for years and years and years. And so it is interesting with the rise of social media and men being involved in social media and having that put in front of them on a regular basis. Interesting that maybe this is less of a norm for women in terms of that, and more of just the exposure piece of it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
Isabel, what do you have to share on that?
Well, I was thinking back. You're right. I can't think of any examples of the boys, the male population of my youth, um, being worried about their appearance. I mean, short of catching the eye of a girl where they, might change their shirt, there wasn't that overt pressure to look a certain way or conform to a certain way. They had different pressure. I really do believe that there was the pressure to be the jock, to be the to be the leader, and to be a little bit callous around women, and the old pigtails in the inkwell, from generations past. And really, yeah, the confusion that existed for both sexes in our adolescence period of how to really behave like a decent human being and how to behave with each other, it was difficult. And I don't know that, my parents were the generation that were being inundated with post-World War II changes in society and advancements, and so there was suddenly this struggle of how do you keep them home on the farm, right? How do you keep them safe until you marry them off, which was my father's aspiration. I had the pressure of having to do very well in school and to be the perfect mother's assistant, housekeeper, co-parenting my siblings, cook and clean, and then convert on a dime to being the farmhand boy out in the fields and do all that stuff. And I remember feeling so confused and perplexed by my father insisting that I do all of this work in both roles, but that I should not be allowed to see animals fornicate or drive a car. Like, and he just was very like the clear that should not happen, and there's no need for you to drive. Your husband will do that. It was perfectly fine for me, but not. So yeah, no wonder I'm a mess, a hot mess, a bad good girl, a good bad girl, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I know. And it's so frustrating because who sets the standards for thin, normal, pretty, all of those different things? Who sets those standards, and why do we continue to buy into them?
Well, and I think on some of that, well, part of the challenge, and like I said, I have a daughter. I have a son and a daughter, so it's nice. I have to think about things from both sides,
Mm.
like Jackie, like you do, and Isabel, you as well. And so, but when I think about my daughter, we kind of say we want to have, different body types, and then you get into these, okay, it's about this type of thigh, your thighs are, this and that, versus I don't think we're to that point yet. We still are ranking and rating. And I just am so excited for the day that we get to the point, maybe it'll be with my granddaughter within her lifetime,
I hope.
that it's just about love your body, have your body, cherish it, whatever, and just let's quit ranking and rating bodies. That's it. Be done with it, and stop these trends of, oh well, bigger, but just stop. That will be my day when we've made a lot of progress, because all of it still comes down to something's better than something else.
And I think that's it. I think you're dead on in terms of really raising up the next generation to love their bodies from day one, to be mindful of what we say. Oh, are you sure you want to eat that? Or, just so many different messages that we unintentionally can send just by saying the wrong thing. We know as women, we hang on to that stuff for years and years and years. Somebody can compliment you 50 times and say one thing that slightly upsets the apple cart in terms of your appearance or something like that. And that's the one thing that we tend to hang on to, and we don't forget that. So it's an interesting shift. Let's move on to that rule number 3, which is don't talk about the bad stuff. And boy, have we had a lot of that over the last few years with the Me Too movement. And finally, women speaking up, not just about sexual harassment or any of those type things, or that particular topic, but many other things too. So why is it, do you think, that we grew up in an era that basically said, deal with it, let's not talk about it, or it's not safe to talk about it? Isabel?
Wow. Okay, so this is not a conversation that I can contain in this episode, but my example is I grew up in a family that kept a lot under the rug, incest, abuse, violence, some unhealthy behaviors and destructive behaviors. Even going to church as a child, although my parents didn't go to church, for appearances, they had a neighbor take me to Sunday school, and I observed the hypocrisy that was going on there. But I probably would have had my tongue removed if I'd ever vocalized that. Why are they saying those things about each other? Or why are they saying that person is not good? Their behavior is not appropriate. But in fact, I've witnessed them doing the very same thing outside of church, right? So I I think we have a lot of unlearning to do before we can replace those patterns with healthy behaviors.
Lee?
Yeah, I think some of it too, for me, kind of reflecting on that, and when the whole, Me Too and kind of those conversations started, it was really, I think a lot of women, I know we did it. And Isabel, I remember a couple conversations you and I had, but I
Yeah.
think, that the difference is that you could take just about any woman and she could relay some type of experience in her life, usually more than one,
Mhm.
sometimes more than what you can count on, both hands, of where, something happened. And I think after a certain point, you get to the, it's just not worth it to say something. So that kind of around that Me Too. And I think the power of that was just giving voice to so much repressed experiences, where it was just, it doesn't mean everyone wanted to take legal action or do this or do that. It was just
Yeah.
sometimes to have your experience
Mhm.
recognized by another human. And I think that's, that was the power of the Me Too movement, at least personally for me, hearing some of those stories and seeing the courage to come out and say those things. And I think in general, there's another side of that. I think, as women, for me, because not all of our stories and the things that like we don't say are bigger than some of those types of experiences of sexual harassment or assault or anything along those lines. I think we're taught like, hey, we're supposed to want it all. When you want it all, you got to deal with crap. You just got some shit because you got to be tough and you got to pull up your good big girl panties and go do this because life is hard and you're choosing a hard path because you want a big life. Deal with it. And I do think that's some of what goes with being quiet, because it's this deal with it.
Yeah.
And you want that, okay, great, this is what comes with that. And I think we do it to ourselves. I think there's a message. I don't think that's unique to a woman's experience.
No.
But I think there is a little bit of that. Okay, you want all that, here you go, deal
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. If I could add to Lee, exactly my feeling is that somehow inside we've internalized this belief that, okay, if we want that life, if we want to change what was predicted and prescripted for us,
Right.
then maybe there's something not quite right about us, and we do a little self-punishment as
Yeah.
well, right? By
Yeah.
accepting those behaviors. I really hope that Me Too becomes an opportunity for us to be talking about this, not in a vindictive way, but that we bring it out in the open so that when it's open, it's less likely to happen, because our daughters and our granddaughters will go, oh, yeah, that's not acceptable behavior. Where you and I, were, it was kind of like it came with the damn package, right? You had to deal with the lecherous stares and remarks. You had to sort of shrug it off, or as my friend would say, just put on your big purple condom so their shit couldn't get on you and you could get on with doing your job. Yeah, I'm hopeful.
Yeah, Jackie, something you said, because I think about my daughter, my youngest daughter, and and man, sometimes she'll tell me like where her boundaries are and how she handled something or how she, and it makes me just kind of go, well, maybe you should be a little, and I'm like, oh shit, no, you got
Oh,
it right, I've got it wrong. Like, shut
yeah.
up,
Yeah.
like, go. I'm learning from you now because I have to rewrite that. So I love that when she kind of shocks me, and she's never rude or whatever, but in some of those situations, she is like, uh-uh, and no. And her tolerance level for what I would say behavior that makes her uncomfortable is at a completely different level than mine was when I was her age, and to be honest, still. And so it's been fun to kind of make sure I don't stop her and rewrite however she got her good programming. Hallelujah, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Good
Well, I was
stuff.
going to say, it's probably, maybe you've done a better job. I don't like to use that word, but a better job of teaching her to do what you
Yeah.
say and not necessarily what you do, which we know is so often the reverse. But she got a lot of that from
Yeah.
someone, and we know that, their primary role model is their mom. Our daughters, is their mom, and
Yeah.
if nothing else. And I think sometimes we're harder on ourselves, so you probably modeled different behaviors for her that maybe you felt or thought different
Yeah.
things than actually showed up. And that kind of leads us into the second topic, which is secrets. And we've covered a lot of that already just in talking about the rules and what those and what those rules created within us to hide those secrets. And it's kind of funny. I mean, I'm thinking back now just on a situation that happened to me when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and it was an inappropriate touching situation with a close family friend. To this day, I've never told any of my family. I've told my husband and a few people close, and now the whole world, but eventually. But it's kind of interesting. And that person is no longer living. Um, and to this day, I don't share that secret more than anything, because there's that part of me that wants to protect their memory of him.
Right.
What is wrong with that? I mean, that's crazy. On the one hand, on the other hand, I don't know. Maybe it was a different time, different place. And I look back now and I think, what would be the value? What would be the value to anybody? I've dealt with it myself, emotionally, whatever. What would be the value of revealing that now to my 80-something-year-old parents who would be devastated by it, who probably would, take on a certain amount of blame or guilt or whatever. And there's no point. We can't go back all that many years. But that does, because we've had the tendency to accept and adhere to those rules, I know for many of us that creates that secret within. We go inward and we stuff those feelings and emotions. And a lot of times that can come out later in behaviors. And, Lee, you've talked a little bit about yours with your eating disorder and some of those things, how, those secrets and those feelings showed up that way. So what I want to do is kind of jump forward before we end this first part and just ask, how then do we, knowing these things, and we've covered some of this, how do we begin to create that safe place for our daughters, for our granddaughters, and for those who we mentor as, part of our bigger audience, and those lift as you climb people, Isabel, to coin your phrase, those people who we have the ability to positively affect. Lee, what are your thoughts on that, creating that safe space?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so many things you just said, Jackie, like, resonate. And I think first of all, we have to allow people to deal with their experiences and not shovel more shame on people for how they choose to resolve something. And those are individual things. And I think the safe space is, I mean, for me, it's with my daughter, and my son. And I think about having that relationship with them. And I think, having that idea where who your people are, but also a tough lesson that I learned going through my eating disorder process, and in high school, was realizing it was the first time I had a therapist who said to me, people can love you, but that doesn't mean they can always be the support you need them to be. So don't confuse the two. And I think helping, our children understand how to, that difference, that and that discernment of, I have people that love me, not all of them can be the support that I need for perhaps this issue I'm dealing or facing with. And kind of, accepting people for who they are, because then we get better at knowing who our support team is. And so for me, that was a really important lesson I learned early on. And I've tried to instill that in my kids, knowing that. And then knowing when I can be there and role modeling that, to be honest, sometimes, because sometimes I'm not the person that can be the best support or whatever, and knowing that. So to me, and the other thing is, I think with secrets, I think are, they're shame based. We hide them. And I think knowing how to have that safe environment and where you can put them out there, versus I see a lot of this where people kind of just, they throw it all out on social media, and you watch these huge backlashes against people and you go, wow, here's somebody that was being vulnerable. Like, but what are you thinking? Like, that's not, that's, the TMI or whatever. So I think it's really teaching kind of that balance and discernment of, really recognize the power of vulnerability, but also when it's not respected, there can be a really strong backlash against that. And so those are the conversations I have with my kids and myself on kind of how to create that safe space.
Yeah.
Great. Isabel.
Well, coming full circle to what Lee said at the beginning and just now, it's I was thinking about that when we make the decision to stop um, having the secrets just inside eating away at us, and we decide to share, being careful who you give the control of that vulnerability to is really important. I loved what you said about not everybody who loves us has the capability to support us through these difficult things. So hooray, amazing for every single individual who has the courage to say, I'm ready to face this demon now and deal with it. But then having that wisdom to go, who do I want on my team? Who can really support me through this? Not to say platitudes and all the things that, they think they should say, but to really walk with you through the evolution, through that, walk through the fire. That's smart. Vulnerability, that's really smart. It's part of what I value from our friendship and our triad is that I know that I am safe to be vulnerable with you and that you have enough life experience and wisdom to really be effective supporters for me. So I wish that for everyone in our audience.
Perfect. I love that. Yeah. And I think, my final thoughts on that myself are just opening those conversations with those around us, checking in with the younger crowd for sure from time to time, just to make
Yeah,
sure how's everything going, and that open, even that, like, we don't want to raise our children or grandchildren to be fear-based, to always be
no,
suspicious of what's going on.
no,
At the same time,
yeah,
I think there's conversations that can be had to open up that, not everybody is your friend. And sometimes you may experience or feel something. Always know that it's safe to come to me. And feelings are just that, as we've covered. You got to
yeah,
feel the feelings. And
yes.
anything like that does not have anything to do with your goodness, your worthiness. It's not about you. It's not a direct reflection on you or anything about you. And, unfortunately, those are the things that we tend to carry with us all the way through when that
Yeah.
happens. And a lot of it, I think, is because we didn't have the conversation to deal with that before, but now we know that we do. And so that's pretty powerful. So this episode has been our portion on rules and secrets. Please tune in for episode number 2 of this 2-part series, where we're going to talk about truth, how we bring all this to the truth, and how we as women incorporate all this to move forward better. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Leave any questions or comments below. We would love to continue the dialogue. Join us over on Facebook. We'll put the link in the description below, and share this with your friends if you know anyone who struggled with rules and secrets, and then truth and women. We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.